2/3, 1/3 on this side where this is going to go. So the scale of this thing is going to be pretty small back in here. That gives me a little bit extra room to put other things in there. So, as quickly as that sort of establishes my composition. Now the rest of it is kind of filling in gaps. And this has a little bit of a hill to it, but most of these are just plants. A little bit of a mound kind of things going on over here. Now here, but I want you to always think about foreground, middle ground, background. Foreground being, the path leading us into the scene here and all of this. Midground is where the focal point is. Everything behind that midground and the horizon line up in here is going to be background. So foreground, middle ground is the focal point, and background. So if I know that's there, then I know that other plant's going to be right in here, that spiky plant, right in this area in here. And the other smaller one. So I've got large, medium, and small in terms of how to interpret these little plants and things. And that's all going to change pretty much anyway. What I'm looking for at this point is just basically designing a composition that's going to work for me. Now there's that big shape back in here of that big tree, and that's kind of cool because if I squint my eyes, and that's the best way to look for, what am I wearing sunglasses for? Oh, it's a whole different scene. So it's much easier to see the value structure if you squint your eyes, because that way it kind of minimizes a lot of things that you don't need to focus on. So just focus on what's light over dark and dark over light. I'm noticing the top of this scrubby desert tree.
Could you repeat that? Dark over light and...
Yeah, with values, everything is either light over dark or dark over light. Your value scale from white to black is between 1 and a 9. So 1 being white and 9 being black, you've got all these other grays in between that'll lead you up there. So, at number 2 would be just, slightly gray. And a number 8 would be really dark, almost black. On most of the films I've worked on, we try to stay between a 3 and a 7 or 8 because contrast is going to be built in film anyway. So if contrast is built in film, then if you go too dark, then things are going to go black. If you go too light, things are going to go blow out and go white. You don't have to worry about that so much. That's something the directors deal with mostly. But I remember on Fantasia and some of the things I've worked on, we always had to pay between a 3 and a 7 so they could, knowing that film was going to create that extra contrast anyway. But I don't want you to worry about that. That's just a fact I'm just throwing out. So, but here you do have to think about that. So I'm thinking about what's light over dark and dark over light. When I look at that scrubby tree, it's a focal point. It's pretty much the same value. It's slightly lighter than what's behind it, but it's not drastically lighter. We also have color, a little bit of color in here, which on an overcast day is going to help a little bit. But I also want to try and make a way of separating foreground, middle ground, and background. So if I know this is the middle ground, I really want to push the background back. So if I squint my eyes and that big tall tree here, it's lighter than what's back here on the right. So I could even go either darker back there or lighter here or darker here. So I have to make kind of decisions. Because the lighting is flat, I've got to make more decisions than if the lighting was really good and I could just see, a really clear lighting structure. But today the lighting's pretty flat. It's just coming kind of straight down and it's an even lighting. So that makes it a little bit more difficult and a little less fun to paint. But we'll dive in anyway. So with an overcast sky, I'm going to start just with water and just kind of wet the board a little bit with a 1-inch flat. I'm going to take a little bit of white. I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's gray. Now if you're dealing with gouache, remember most of the time it's going to dry darker. So I'm just going to kind of block in some of these things just as a fill for the background, for the sky part. So I'm not really trying to paint much, but just kind of give it a mood, which today is really awful. But as I said, you can be painting all sorts of, I've painted a lot of rainy scenes and different scenes in movies and things so you're always asked to do things way different than sunny skies and things.
So what kinds of scenes or moods would go with an overcast sky? When would you?
Well, it could be a sad moment.
Okay.
If a little girl has lost her puppy and she's at the window of her house and looking out the window, and she's really sad about her puppy, the director might want it to be raining outside or maybe overcast or even nighttime. So there's things like this where the story is always going to dictate the mood and the colors and things that you use. And if you ever get my book, I talk a lot about that sort of thing. Remember, Sonia.
Plug in.
Pre-order,
Our,
guys.
our center student discount.
All right, so I'm going to get a little bit bigger brush here. I mean, not bigger than the 1 inch, but bigger than the. Maybe this is big enough. If you're using gouache, it's probably not. It's probably a little bit better to not put a whole lot of white into it in the beginning. Too much white back in the background would be harder to cover, and the white will keep seeping through if you're not careful. So that's one of the learning curves of gouache that is a little bit of a detriment. Okay, so here I'm going to take my 3/4 inch shader. You can see that kind of a brush. And I'm going to block in some shapes in the background. Now I'm going to keep, the closer I get to the color and value of the sky that I just put in, the further away it's going to seem. So if I take a little bit of the Payne's gray and just go slightly darker in, just a touch of white to it, and start indicating some trees back in here, and just slightly darker than the sky, it might even dry a little darker than it is now. I'm using the very short edge of the brush right in here. I'm not using the point. And by doing that, I can get a little bit of a softer edge on the brush. Now, that's something you'll hear me talk about all through this, so it's not going to be too critical right now. But I just want to get some really, really distant kind of trees in here. There's a really tall one way back there. It might be kind of fun to get something like that in here as well. And again, the closer I keep the color and value to the sky colors that I just laid down, the more distance it's going to create. And it's going to be hard to really understand that at this point, but you'll understand that as I move forward. Over here on this side, I'm going to get a little bit of that too. I'm using the short edge so I can create a sense of texture. And that little bit of texture gives it more the foliage kind of quality that I'm looking for, without getting a lot of these hard edges and things that you see there. When you do that, you don't want a lot of water or paint on the brush. More paint than water, actually. And that'll give you that little softer edge. So one of the things that's going to create a sense of depth is several things. One is overlapping shapes. One shape overlapping another shape. Scale of shapes, small shapes overlapping big shapes overlapping small shapes, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But one of the things is soft focus versus hard edge. So what I want back here is soft focus. It's easy to get that in Photoshop. It's a little more difficult to get that
What do you mean
in
by
Paint.
soft focus?
Soft focus means soft edges. So I'm not using a hard edge. A hard edge would be a very hard edge, something like that, as opposed to the softer edges that I'm trying to accomplish on those. So the harder edge will be towards the focal point, and the softer edges will give you more. It's like you've noticed in film when there's a camera move and the camera pushes in on something in the midground or the distance, and the foreground goes out of focus. And that's called a rack focus. But there's different kinds of things that happen where the soft focus, the camera can only see so much at one time. And so for things to stay back in the distance here, I want them to be very, very soft focus, so they stay, again, closer to the color and values of the sky, and stay back in that distance. Everything's gonna, it's hard to see that in the very beginning when you just see this. But when I start adding really darks and things in there, it'll start making a lot more sense. So to step forward from that, I'm gonna go slightly darker again. As I step forward, I'm gonna go from light into dark. It can be the opposite too. Sometimes you can go all dark in the background and have the light come forward.
And you
So-
said to create the soft edge, you have more paint than water on
More
your
paint
brush,
than
right?
water. It's a dry brush technique, so you just get a little bit of water. I usually just take the water pretty much out of the brush, so the brush is just damp. And if you have the right color and everything mixed first, then you can just use the short edge of the brush to get that kind of effect. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit darker now. I'm going to still go back into the Payne's gray and go back right into the color that I just used in the same spot, in the same location. And I'm still going to keep it, maybe add a touch of blue into it, ultramarine blue, and maybe just a little touch of olive green. Olive green's a very strong color, so you got to be really careful with that. And I'll start adding a darker color in front of that. And I get most of the water out because I don't want, again, I want to keep it sort of a soft edge. I'm going to put in more of a medium shape in here to represent some of those ones behind the big tall tree. And the best thing to do is just, this is all silhouette shape. You know, think of everything as basically just laying down silhouette shapes. One silhouette shape over another silhouette shape.
At this point, you're not thinking too much about true color, but more about value.
I'm
relationship?
thinking about color, but I'm thinking about color that's going to give me a sense of depth.
Okay.
If I paint that real distant tree green, and I paint the greens up here the same color and value, I haven't created depth except with overlapping shapes. So what I'm trying to do is create a sense of depth with color and value as well. And that's what film is all about. When you see film, it's on this flat screen, but in order to create a sense of depth, you have to exaggerate it in the artwork. And you'll see that in every scene of every Disney movie, going all the way back. See, I've got very little water on the brush. It's mostly just a little bit of paint, and that gives it that softer kind of quality. But it's just silhouette shapes. One silhouette shape there, and I'll do another silhouette shape over here, a little bit more paint. And you can add other colors into it. If I had just maybe a touch of alizarin crimson, get slightly more violet, you know, that's okay as well. Sometimes you want to kind of mix things up. So basically I want to play warm against cool, so especially on a day like today. So everything in the background is going to be cool, everything in the focal point is going to be basically warmer than that. So the focal point, to create a focal point, the focal point is always going to have the most detail. It's going to have the most saturation of color, and it's going to have the most contrast. Those three elements of design are almost, I can't say every time, but almost always will be surrounding the focal point. Now if there's movement with animation, the movement is always going to be the focal point, so movement is going to trump everything else.
So can you repeat the three things again?
There's, well, there's actually more than that, but there's saturation of color, detail, and contrast. Those are the three major ones. Okay, so when I start putting in the darker, and I'm going to put the dark, and I want this to play, this scrubby looking thing to play light over dark. So I squint my eyes, and it's not that much lighter, but I'm going to exaggerate that. So I'm going to go darker behind that. I know where the placement is. Even if I just had a little bit of this showing, I know the placement of this, so I'm not going to worry about any of this in terms of detail. Right now I just want to play with silhouette shapes and color. So I'm going to do that tall tree now as what's behind the focal point. So I'm going to go pretty dark on this. And just a little bit of olive green. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson in here. And I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue. And I'm going to block this in. Now I got to make sure there's air in there. Even though it's a 360-degree form, trees, even though they look, you know, a tendency is to paint them fairly flat. But you got to treat them as if they're 360 degrees. Most of the stuff you'll be doing as film artists nowadays with CGI is you'll be doing what they call visual development or conceptual art that defines the form. So that's why lighting is so important. You want to define the form as much as you can, but you got to create a sense of volume. So when the CGI artist has to make a model of that tree, they'll know basically what to do. So I'm always thinking about the form of things as well. There's going to be a lot of information kind of coming out very quickly, and I'm not expecting you to remember all this. So just kind of, you know, remember what you can. But I want a little bit of air showing in this tree as well. I want to make sure that it's dark all the way behind here, so when I put that other thing in there, the scrubby desert plant, it's going to show up. So I'm going to keep all this dark. I'm going to introduce different colors and temperatures as I go along as well. So I'm going to add a little bit more of I'm going to add cerulean blue into it and get some cooler colors. Just to put the tip of this in the water, so I just have a touch of water. I'm going to bring that all the way down here. And I want to keep it fairly loose. I don't want to tie it down like I'm trying to copy everything about that tree. I'm thinking of large shapes, I'm thinking of color and contrast, and that's about it, and silhouette shapes. If I start thinking about detail at this point, I'm wasting my time, because none of this could be permanent at this point. Just make sure I see the tree trunk there so I know the placement of that shape. I'm going to drag some of these over on the other side a little bit, add some greens and things over here. So everything I'm doing right now is basically a base. It's a base silhouette shape and a base indication of the scene. Not concentrating on detail. I'm just concentrating on silhouette shapes of one color blending into another color, one value blending or overlapping another value, working from light to dark, dark to light, all those kinds of things. Where's my umbrella? Is it even on me or over me?
Yeah, it
I
is.
feel like is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's behind you.
Is it block? It doesn't feel like it's blocking anything. I feel like I'm squinting here to.
It's blocking the back of your head.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's important. All right. So I'm gonna add a little bit of red. I like red in the shadows. That might seem a little unusual, but what it does, alizarin crimson especially, it adds a little bit of vibrancy to the scene. I'm just kind of focusing on the very soft edge.
Is this mostly for vegetation that you would have red in the shadows?
For what?
Is this mostly for vegetation?
For vegetation?
Yeah, like the treetops and stuff. And
No,
bushes?
in the shadows. I put red in shadows.
all shadows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes red, violet, you know, all different types of blues, blue violets, things like that. They give a little bit more color to the scene rather than trying to go dark green and then dark green. You know, you don't want to do that. You want to start adding color into shadows and things, just to keep the color more interesting for film than you would for, you're not painting for galleries. This is not a class teaching you how to paint for galleries. So I'm trying to teach you some film techniques, some color tips on how to paint and use color in film a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit of white in here. I'm going to add just a little bit more cerulean blue. And I'm going to get a little bit of a different tone right in here as well. Just as a transitional color back in here. So you get a little bit of this color behind the form. This is a great classroom.
The best.
A transitional
You
tone.
could be sitting in a computer lab, which you will be doing, but not today. When I add water, I just barely put the tip of the brush in the water. I'm not trying to get a lot of water. And I play with different colors so I can get different, not only different colors, but different temperatures of color and things in here. So it becomes a little bit more interesting to look at. So you can see some of the reds and red violets that go into the shadows here.
Is there any way you organize these temperatures?
I
you
don't
just-
understand what you're saying.
Is there any way you organize these temperatures, or do you just like spread them to create visual interest everywhere?
Well, I don't want a lot of color back in here, so I keep, you know, it can be different. It's hard to just say one thing or another about that because it can be very different depending on what you're trying to achieve
Okay.
and everything. But shadows tend, one thing I'm trying to get across is that if you're going to have a blue structure, don't just go dark blue in a shadow. If you have a red structure, just don't go dark red. Sometimes you want to play opposites, little complementary colors. So if I got a lot of green, I want to put a lot of reds in there because it's a complement to that. And it'll add a little bit more interest to it. So if you do that, it's not going to be boring. If you start just going from one to a green to a dark green and things like that, it's going to get really boring really fast. I'm not adding any light to any of this right now. This is all base stuff to work on. That's going to be underneath everything else.
So is it kind of, if you decide to go, you know, like cool to, if you decide to have like the lighting be cool and then to have warms in the shadows, that should be
Yeah.
consistent throughout the entire piece?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
cool light will create warm shadows. Warm light will create cool shadows.
Got it.
One light.
How do you know when it's getting to the point where it's just looking like a blob of rainbow using all these colors? Because I feel like that's a
Well,
common
you got to be
problem.
subtle with it. I'm using very subtle colors. I'm not doing. I mean, I haven't poked a bright red in there anywhere yet. And again, this is the underlay. This is what you would the foundation that everything else is going to be built onto. So this isn't going to be the final necessarily. Things will still change.
Yeah, okay.
So you got to make sure that you know, you keep it fairly loose. You don't want to tie things down too quickly with detail because it could all change completely. So let's see. I want to make sure I got a little bit more color back in here. because that's where the focal point is going to be in front of. So I want to make sure there's a little bit more color going over here. So I'm going to lighten it a little bit, but especially with blue. So I can get a little bit of light on the sides here, so it feels like there's a little bit of color on the other side of the tree as well.
So, like, even though there actually isn't any blue on that tree, it's just
Oh, there is.
there is.
You know, one thing I tend to see, I'm very acute to color things. I mean, can you tell this plant is slightly bluer than, say, the tree back there?
Oh, yeah.
Things like that. I mean, there's, you know, the more you do this, the more you're going to get a little bit more sensitive to colors and things in there. And a lot of it is you're right, there's not a blatant blue in there that I see. But some of the leaves can be cooler, which means they may go towards a blue-green. Some it could be warmer, they go more towards the yellow-green. Things of that nature. So it's not a blatant thing where you're going to see all of a sudden a big blob of blue in there. But you can go a little bit bluer, and I'll demonstrate some of that kind of stuff as well.
It's not that it's
Color is
actually
it's a difficult thing to teach because a lot of it is subjective, and you'll find this out when you start working with directors, how most directors don't come from color. They come from storyboarding and story development and animation, but they aren't necessarily art directors or know anything about color, yet they have control of that. They have the final say about color. So I've had directors say absolutely stupid things when it comes to color. But, you know, they're in control, so you just got to kind of go with that. Okay, so before we get into everything else down here, what I'm going to do is just block in a simple foreground. I don't want to start blocking all these different bushes yet until I just get a color field underneath. So I'm just going to paint a field of very, very dark color under here. And that's just basically Payne's Gray and alizarin crimson to kind of just block this in as shape. And that's just to get rid of the white of the board basically and kind of fill in some of these gaps here. Get a little bit of brown in there, not too much. But I want it dark so I can start adding lights over the dark. But this is just basically a field of color, and even putting some color in that, and then the darks kind of leading into, or light over these things, and darks as well.
So you're making the creative decision of making the left side warmer than the right side?
Well, it's just the underpainting.
I see.
So don't get critical yet. This is all just kind of laying down a foundation that everything is going to work on top of.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to lay in. I'm going to do a dirt path here instead of that structured, gravelly kind of thing, asphalt, whatever it is. So I'll make it just a little bit more playful, and give it just a little bit of a. I'm going to make it a little darker in the foreground when I get the path kind of thing going here. And I want a soft edge. I don't want really hard edges on the sides of this. I want soft edges pretty much everywhere at this point. So basically that lays in my composition. So now I'm going to go even a little bit darker back in here. So I can get some nice contrast when I start putting some of these other things in there. And I'm going to use the short edge of the brush to soften a little bit of that here and there. Okay, so I want that contrast when I get all of the purple flowers and that other kind of stuff going up in there. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on here. The complexity of all this is overwhelming kind of when you look at it. So you got to find ways to organize all of that. So I'm going to start putting in some other colors in here. And these are just foundational colors. And they're going to seem a little bit out of place because there's no blue bushes in there and things like that. But what I'm trying to do is create an interesting ground plane that I can start putting green on top of, because most of those are going to be greens or variations of green. So I want to get that kind of the reds, red violets, and colors like that in here. So everything you do at this stage is really setting up for everything else that's going to happen. So it's like building a house. You got to get that foundation. It never looks like a house till they start putting windows and doors and things in there. It's kind of the same thing with painting. I'm going to keep it kind of loose and just with color. Okay, now I'm going to just kind of block in. I'm going to take the little 1/2" shader and block in that focal point, that tree, just as a shape. And it's pretty gray. So I'm just going to kind of get that in here just so I know the scale of it. I'm going to get that scale working and the placement of that tree. Probably coming down in here a little bit.
And that's what you chose as the focal point, right?
This is, yeah, basically the focal point.
It's a pretty good
It's
one.
only because because the little path leads right to it. You know, and you got the violet flowers and things like that. So that's kind of why I'm picking that. Okay, so
What?
There's a rabbit.
Oh.
yeah, there's rabbits out here.
Is the
Okay.
proper term is bunny?
Look how that's what we focus on.
Let's see.
It's gone.
All right, you guys focus. All right, so I'll start indicating some little bushes and things like that around here. And again, just the silhouette shapes. The one silhouette shape overlapping another silhouette shape is what you want to start thinking about. So I can start bringing some greens into a little bit now, especially around the focal point, just as an indication of where things are going to go. Again, these are not final. Nothing's final until I stand up and walk to lunch. So I can start bringing some other colors in here now. That's why the cool colors in the background, now when I start pulling the greens into it, they're going to make a little bit more sense because it's playing the complements to that. Okay, and there's no structure in the tree back here right now. I'm going to actually bring it up a little bit higher and bring some of these other colors up in here and a little bit in the bluer. Start adding some light into this tree shape now. Now there's no sense of lighting anywhere basically except just kind of flat lighting. So if I take the round brush, the number 9 round, and I'll get a color here that that will start indicating the sense of light, and it's going to start giving me a light direction. So the sun is probably a little bit more on this side. It's hard to tell at this point, but for the sake of the painting, I'm going to say the sun's coming a little bit more from the left than the right, just so I have a direction. So I'm going to flatten the brush. Even though it's a round brush, I'm going to flatten it out. I'm going to start indicating light on this side over here.
Could you maybe specify a little bit the difference between the round brush and the use of the round brush versus the
Do you know what a filbert is, brush?
yes?
It's kind of like that. It kind of gives you a little bit of a rounded edge rather than a flat edge. So it's easier to not get a specific shape. I'm not looking for a specific shape. I'm looking for something that's kind of going to give me a sense of light. And there's also very little paint. I'm sorry, very little water. It's mostly paint, so it's giving me a little bit of a dry brush kind of effect. Now by doing this, I'm starting to create a little bit of light back here. And I got to be careful because this shape in here, the spiky desert plant, has to be lighter. So I might have to actually go darker behind it a little bit more. So I'm lighting a little bit more light on the edges of these things right now, back in here, and back in here as well. So before I get too much into this, I think I'm going to have to go a little darker behind it in order for that plant to show up. So I'm going to go a little bit darker. Payne's Gray, Ultramarine Blue, Prism Crimson. And I'm just going to go a little bit darker back in here. Kind of bring that down a little bit. And I'll think of that as kind of shadow in the tree. Again, very little water. Just kind of dry brush. And I'm just kind of roughing it in here. And smooth out some of the edges. Okay, so so now I'm going to start adding just a quick indication of those spiky things so I know where they're going to go. And again, it's going to be mostly as a silhouette shape, a little bit brighter, add a little bit of blue into it. I'm going to add, as I see those shapes as having a little bluer tint. I might even go a little darker to start with. Let's see if they show up okay. But I want to get kind of the shapes of these things in here. And I don't want to go the brightest yet. I want to go more of the darker shapes first. But they're still going to be, even though they're darker, they're still lighter than what's behind them. But I want to get that in here without going super bright. I want to start from dark to light, basically, and get some of these shapes coming out of here. So pay attention to the shape language. You know, they're not just perfect. They're kind of going in all kinds of different directions. And your brush should replicate that as well. Okay, I'm gonna start adding a little bit of white. I'm just going a little bit lighter. So, and I'm gonna start indicating some of the shapes coming outward and where the light's hitting. This isn't going to be the brightest light, but it will be the light that will indicate the sense of light that's hitting the things. And there's different ways to do it. You can go from, you know, normally I would go from the inside out, but not always. As you can see, some of these aren't doing that. And these are going to dry a little darker, so when I put it down, it's going to feel light, but then it's going to dry a little closer to what I'm wanting. Now before I get to the final, I'm going to make sure I get the tree trunk done too. So this is kind of the base of that tree. I know where it's going to go. I know, you know, what's behind it and everything that's working that way. I'm going to go a little bit darker in the middle of this now. So I'm going to take a little bit more of the ultramarine blue. And I'm going to create just a little bit of softening some of these shapes on the inside. Darken them just a little bit. Okay, now the tree trunk, it's still pretty light. I don't want to get too dark on that tree trunk, so I want to keep it fairly light. But you see how it's darker at the top, underneath the foliage?
Shadow.
That happens almost all the trees where you're going to have the shadows going to be cast from the,
Above.
yeah, from above, from these things. And I want to create a little bit more of a sense of directional light onto the tree trunk. So you have a direction now. So that dictates the direction for the whole tree, and for the whole scene I mean, not just the tree. Okay, so there's a lot of, there's little bits of ochre and brown and stuff in the tree, and the foliage as well if you really look at it. It's not just green. Sometimes it gets a little bit of the ochre and stuff, colors coming out on the tips. And I get a lot more refined with a smaller brush as I get into the scene. But I don't want to add too much detail here until I get everything else kind of in place as well. There's little textures on the tree trunk. I can kind of indicate a little bit of that here and there. Don't need to overdo it that far back, but just a little indication of texture sometimes is enough to give the interpretation of what it is I'm looking at. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit grayer on this part back in here as it transitions. There's always transitional colors and values too. You know, one color transitioning into another. That you'll see that as you go along. It's something I can't really explain too much of right now. But I mention it, but it's hard to focus on just telling you specific things too soon. As I get in here, I can start indicating light sources on certain areas and certain things. Keep it simple. Don't overdo too much at this point in terms of the lighting or the detail. I mean, not the lighting, but the detail. I'm going to just indicate just a little bit of structure on the tree in the background as well. I'm not going to go brown. I'm going to go more of a deeper green so it stays in the family, the same family of color. I don't want to start putting other foreign colors back in here too much But I want to just give a little bit of structure to the tree back in here, just so you can kind of get an idea. It makes it feel more like a tree. And sometimes you can do this in the beginning, sometimes you can do it towards the end. If it's small branches and things, I always recommend doing it later, not in the beginning. It's a little heavy. If it's too heavy or it's too much, you can always lighten it or just add water to it and soften it. And start adding some deeper bushes and things in here. So the underpainting for a lot of this stuff, like I'm going to get some dark. It dried a little too light for what I want back in here, so I'm going to go a little bit darker. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it. But I want that contrast to be a little bit more obvious. Here. Okay, I'm going to switch to this other brush here. And I'm going to start putting some other plants and things in here. There's a lot of stuff going on in this particular scene. So give the silhouette shapes of just basic shapes. Doesn't seem like you're always painting a lot because the lay-in is hugely important, but it's basic stuff. It's not detail. The fun stuff is when you get to the detail, of course, but you've got to get the basics in there first, or the detail has nothing to hang on to. So I'm going to start getting some bigger shapes up in here as well. So you have to try and think of the overall thing as well. Don't just think about what it is you're painting at the moment. You got to always consider everything within the whole scene. And sometimes it means painting just simple shapes before you start painting everything else. So I'm going to get some of these other darks in here. Again, it's to hang the lighter plants onto. So I want some of that stuff that I put in earlier to peek through, little bits of violet and reds and things like that. So I don't want to cover it all up, but I want to get enough of it so I can start adding things onto it. When I start adding some of the greens and things, then it'll make a little bit more sense. I've still got that other spiky thing that's going to go in here. So I'm going to set that up with just a little bit of color behind it and darks. And we got the gravelly part of the sand and everything in here as well. If I want to get a little bit of that in there, I'll just kind of scumble some of that in right now. Just basic color. In here as well. I want some of that red to show through, but I'm going to make it a little bit lighter and a little bit of that sand tint as well.
The value structure you're going with is light in the background, darker in the middle ground, and then lighter again in the foreground.
Yes.
And that's what you're planning on like sticking with, so that's
Pretty much.
Okay.
I might go a little darker on the path so I can
Okay.
keep the light and everything up in here.
got it.
I don't want the light to kind of come down here too much. But generally, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to start adding a little bit of light into this. Here I'm starting with the cooler colors. The warmer leaves are going to be the ones that get towards the yellow-green, and those are the ones that are getting the most light. As they go back into the form, then I'm going to add blue a cerulean blue and ultramarine blue, so they become a cooler green down inside the plants. And then as I start putting the detail of the leaves and things on, those will be a cooler, warmer green. So I want all these down here, and I want the little bits of red to pop through. That's why it's all underpainting. A lot of this is just underpainting. But again, that's if you don't have the underpainting kind of set, then it can be much more difficult to achieve that final look. So you get just a little bit of that ground back in here, and actually probably a little too hard edge on that because it's going to be mostly covered up with plants. So I'm going to kind of take that edge out. And start adding a little bit more light towards the greens back in here, just to define the light source. Some of these plants, there's a lot of little vertical plants and things going on back there too. I'm going to block in this foreground plant because it's very spiky, and I want to make sure I have the placement of that. And start with a cooler, a little bit cooler, and then build up to some of the warmer colors on it. And this is not going to be final, it's just going to be for basically placement, so I know where it's going to be. Some other spiky things going on over here. I might make that dark over light. Let me bring it up, I don't know. I think I'll bring the darks up. So sometimes it dries darker, sometimes the paint dries lighter, depending on the colors and what colors behind it and around it and all those kinds of things. So it's a little bit difficult sometimes to judge exactly how things are going to dry. But I want to get more of the darks up in here so I can place some of the lighter plants. But I'm going to change the color of that tree back there so I don't get too much color in one direction with all the green. So it's still going to work into the same scene just fine. Just got little bits of silhouette shapes on the edge. But I want to play with color just a little bit more here, especially with desert plants where you can really have fun with them. Take a little bit of green into there. And again, I'm just thinking pretty much as a silhouette shape. Somebody didn't get enough sleep last night. You'd think it was week 13 or 14. So as I start putting these darker shapes, then these make more sense back in here, even though they dried maybe a little bit too light. But you get a little bit more sense of depth with overlapping shapes and color. And diminishing values also, as the values go back, they're going to get, in most cases, get lighter. At least in this particular case. And there's a lot of other little colors and things going on back here, which you can kind of pop in as you feel necessary. Some little reds and things like that, add a little bit of color to it. And I'm not trying to get real specific with those kinds of things yet, just kind of little bits of color to add some variety. And again, when you're looking at a scene like this, you don't have to paint exactly what's in front of you. Exactly, you know, it's not. You're not trying to take a photograph with the painting, although you will be taking photographs of it. But you're not trying to copy things photographically. You're trying to get a little bit more of an interpretation, especially with color.
Should you take the photograph when you start?
When you
painting
first
it?
start,
Okay.
before you even start painting, first thing you find your scene, you take a snapshot.
Got it.
And about every 30 minutes, you want to do that again.
Okay.
Because the light,
Got it.
today it's not going to change much, but most days when it's real bright and sunny or whatever, the lighting and the shadows and everything are going to change
So it's
continuously. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Alright, so let's see. We got this other spiky one here. Let me get some of that in here. And that was pretty much a blue tip to it as well. It's a little bluer than some of the others. So I'm going to get a little bit of interpretation of that going in here. Silhouette shapes. Don't think of any of this as rendering. Think of it as indication, which is kind of a simplification of one silhouette shape over another silhouette shape. If you think of it as rendering, you might start getting a little too detailed too quickly. So think of it a little bit differently. And it's basically, when I was an Art Center student, we called it indication, where you just indicate rather than render. And it actually makes quite a bit of difference.
Huh.
Could you repeat that last part?
Think of-
Yes. Indication is different than rendering. Indication is kind of a simplification. It's like putting one silhouette shape over another silhouette shape. It's simplifying the process. It's not rendering like you would render something in one of your other classes. So try and keep it simple. So you don't get too complicated with things too quickly. The real detail should come towards the end. As you see in this, it's mostly just kind of laying things in and trying to set up everything for the final lighting, the final detail, and things like that. So you have to think a little bit differently. I'll go back and add more of the details and things as I get into this, but I just want to kind of get the overall feeling of everything at this point. There are some rocks and little, I guess they're rocks. I look like rocks over there as well. I don't have to put those in, but I might just put again, indicate a couple of them. Adds a little bit to the desert quality.
Hmm.
Some of these other little plants and things. If you start with the dark, then it's much easier to place the light over the dark. Not in every case, sometimes it's just the opposite. But in this case, I think if I start indicating little bits of shrubs and things like that with some just light patches, it'll start giving me the form.
So they get an example of when it's easier to put the dark over the light.
Yeah, I'm not in this particular painting, I don't think. Sometimes I start with a dark background where the whole background is dark. So it depends on
Artificial lighting,
the
maybe?
scene. Well, there's no artificial lighting here. This is all direct lighting. So artificial lighting you would find indoors or outside where there's something that's lit with lamps or candles and things like that. This is not artificial lighting. There's times you can interpret lighting a little bit stronger in some ways, or a little bit less in some ways. So there's you can play with lighting a little bit. I don't want you to play with lighting too much in the stage that you're at.
I was saying more like in the case that there were artificial lighting, that if that would be a case where you would paint dark over light.
Possibly. I have to figure out what it is I'm trying to accomplish, but it's definitely possible. Peacocks or something, aren't they?
Yeah.
Make the best yells.
Alright, so we start indicating a little bit more form with light in some of these areas. When I have a high contrast like that, I want to do a middle value in between, so it transitions a little bit more from the light into the dark. So that's something you always want to think about as well. Here I'm just going to get little bits of light back in here to transition into the foreground. Is this all making sense to some degree? I know there's a lot I'm throwing out here at one time, but when I keep doing this every week, it'll start making a lot more sense. Actually, it'll make a lot more sense in the lab, because I talk about a lot of the same elements of design in the lab on the computer that I'm talking about out here, but sometimes it makes more sense with students in a digital format.
Do you think it's necessary? It's always better to start with real paint and then go into digital, or do you think like after a while of practicing the actual paint that all of these same things can be accomplished with digital?
Well, what it is if you look at Nathan Folks and Lou Romano and a lot of my friends that are art directors and work in the industry, they didn't get good digitally. They got good traditionally before they ever touched a Photoshop, just like myself. I worked on many films at Disney and different places way before I started doing Photoshop. So I think it's always better, and again, this is another thing, not to put another plug for my book, but I talk about a lot of this in the book because I'm afraid that students are becoming so digital and growing up digitally that they're eliminating this part of it. And I think that you're going to learn a lot more about color and a lot more about form by observing and painting on location traditionally.
Okay.
And then being able to translate and finish things maybe in Photoshop if you want to.
Okay.
Now, working on films, I've worked on films that were entirely digital. Last film I worked on was Princess and the Frog, and that was 100% digital. Everything I did was in Photoshop. But when I was the production designer for Sony on Open Season, was the very first movie they did, and I was the designer on it. I started traditionally in acrylic, and then I switched over to Photoshop once I had the movie designed the way I wanted it to. So then I could share all that information with the artist that I had hired to support the rest of the movie. So I always think it's better to start traditionally, to learn the traditional formats of things. And I'm not saying eliminate digital at all, because if you work in this industry, you're going to be doing digital 99% of the time. A lot of that they will leave up to the artist, just like they didn't tell me to go entirely digital on Open Season, but when Princess and the Frog, they wanted it 100% digital. So I'd just dive right in with Photoshop on that. But it depends on what your position is and what you're doing. When I was doing Fantasia 2000, my whole color script I did all in acrylic. And I still was able to give all that information the color keys, color script, and everything to the CGI artist, to the background artist, to everybody else working on the film.
So no matter how much experience you have, it's always just
You know,
generally,
don't, yeah,
not always, but you know,
well, that's,
generally better. to
it's,
start
I think it's always better.
Oh, always. Okay.
Yeah, I really do.
Awesome.
I think you're doing a disservice to yourself by eliminating digital or traditional completely
Got it.
as part of your repertoire.
Cool.
Yeah, so the demos I do in the book, I do a lot of traditional, but I also do digital as well in there, so you can see step-by-step formats of how I approach different things, either digitally or traditionally. And yeah, I just, you know, that's why I wrote it kind of as a textbook, because I think students are missing a lot of that nowadays. You know, when I was an art center student back in the 1800s, you know, we carried brushes and paints to school every day. There wasn't any Photoshop or anything digital whatsoever. So it was a whole different experience. And, you know, I'm really glad for that, because I would have hated to miss out on that. There's so much with, you know, it's kind of something that I'm noticing a lot with the photo bashing and stuff that's going on. And I had a discussion about this just yesterday with my friends from DreamWorks about how everybody just overdoes that to the point where they just rely on it. And it's becoming, and you can really fake your portfolio and make your portfolio look really extraordinarily good at times, but it doesn't really help you in the long run. So I think it can be a problem for students to get too focused on getting a really quick look digitally and not being able to follow it through. And I've seen that happen. I had a friend of mine hired as a Disney art director because he had an interesting portfolio, but he wasn't able to follow through. Two friends of mine actually had that same experience. So they didn't last very long at Disney because they couldn't follow through with things in terms of color and art direction and all that sort of thing.
Okay.
So
they like knew what to do just with that one photo bash picture, but they didn't know how things
Yeah.
worked like overall when they
I
got
have
the
that.
assignments.
I see it over and over again. So you know, it's impressive. And art directors, when they look at your portfolios, you know, they know that's happening, obviously. And I've reviewed portfolios as an art director at Disney. I was reviewing portfolios every 2 weeks for almost 10 years.
Jesus.
And we really, you have no more than like 3 or 4 minutes on a portfolio. So you got to be able to kind of get the right information into a portfolio and get it noticed by the right people at the right time, because they grade it, you know, a whole line of people looking at your work, but no more than 2 or 3 minutes for each one to look at your portfolio and then make some kinds of decisions. So I just realized I left out those purple flowers back there.
Sorry.
That can happen later. No biggie.
You
So
can pick
it's
and
only a
choose.
flower, right? So let's get into this side here a little bit and start pulling some light into it. And I told you why I did the blue in there as the leaf, the interpretation of the leaves inside, you know, because you want to work from inside out into these plants. That's why I usually start darker. So now I'm going to go a little bit of blue, but I'm going to start adding more green into it, so I can start getting a little bit, it's still going to be cool, a little more ultramarine blue, with a little bit of interpretation of green. I want to get a little bit of the interpretation of the type of leaf as well that's happening on that. There's all kinds of these things. I pay a lot of attention to the silhouette shapes on the edges of the plant, whether it's trees or plants or whatever, because that gives a lot of a quick read of what the plant actually is, those silhouette edges. And they kind of hang a little bit. So think of shape language. Don't always do everything as a generic plant, you know, the same plant over and over. Think about different types of foliage, because this is observation. This is more what you need to know as you enter the field of film and art and everything, whether it's illustration or film, it really doesn't matter. But you need to build up sort of a library in your head of what things look like. 'Cause that's part of this experience of painting on location, is you're seeing these plants and things and you're interpreting what they are, but you don't want to make up everything either. That's why observation is so important. An art director can always tell when you're making things up, and I put a lot of importance on reference in my classes besides this class. And if you have me in classes coming on, you're going to spend a considerable amount of time just getting reference material, because I don't want anybody making anything up, unless it's, there's sometimes in my style class you'll have, everything okay back there?
Yeah, I was just moving the umbrella.
Oh, all right.
It was gonna fall and just crush your skull and all that.
Oh, well, I have an Indiana Jones hat. It cannot happen. I'm protected by the Force. Oh, that's Star Wars.
Same guy, yeah.
Same guy, that's right.
Except he doesn't believe in the Force.
Ah, what does he know? All right, so we'll get that other desert plant in there, a little bit of it here. Little pom-pom bushes. Look like they should be held by a cheerleader. Whee!
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, it is. It's a bad idea.
Too spiky.
Too spiky.
Well, if I don't know, the cheerleader was a cactus herself, I suppose it could work then.
That's thinking outside the box. Not sure what that means, but yeah.
And I watch those old Disney musicals where like one thing turns into another thing. You know what I mean? Like 1 second the artist is painting trees with bananas, and then all of a sudden he puts some splash of black and it becomes toucans.
Oh, you're thinking of Fantasia 2000? Oh, that's Flamingos. That was Eric Goldberg that did that. But Toucan, I don't know that one. Start bringing in some of these little brighter colors as well. So the most intense saturated colors I usually save closer to the end and add those in a little bit later. Really give you that sense of light. Again, it's a building up process. You can't just start with the what you think is going to be the final look. It's never going to work out right for you. So you want to kind of ease into most of these things a little bit slower. Once you have a lot of experience, then you can do that sort of thing. I have friends that go out on their lunch hours at Disney and some of these studios and spend 30-40 minutes just doing a painting.
Oh, I remember what it was from. It was before that Three Caballeros thing where it was just.
Oh, okay.
It was just when the artists went to. It's like pretty much a documentary of like the artists all just going to South America and.
Yeah,
how
that
they
was Mary Blair and Walt Disney went down there actually for research.
Oh.
All right. So, like the flowers and things like that are usually the last thing I put in. So, I'm gonna get just a little bit more shape back in here. I need some verticals, I think, that might add a little bit of interest to this. In some areas, plus I want to get a little bit more color. Back in here it gets a little bit too black. Be careful with using black. I haven't even touched the black, actually, and look how dark I've gotten in some of these areas.
That's just with the Payne's Gray.
This is Payne's Gray, yeah, but even that can get really dark, so you just got to be a little bit careful with it. I'm going to put a little bit of form in some of these trees back here, just to give me some verticals to play against. Just a little bit of foliage on top of these back in here. There's so many plants in here, you sort of have to kind of pick and choose what you want to put and what you want to leave out, because it's just more than you could ever possibly do, at least in a demo. I had a couple of days I could do it. But, get a little bit more green, overlapping that violet. And I want to pay a little bit of attention to the, again, the silhouette edges of these things. So the scale is sort of appropriate. Scale is really, really something that you have to think about when you're doing these things. If the scale is out of whack, then it throws everything off. All kinds of little things going on back in here. And pretty soon we'll get to the foreground. I know that's usually one of the last things I do as well. Just get some more color back in here. And I'll start getting some of that violet in there as well. This is very strong, so I'm going to desaturate it. If you want to desaturate, which I always advise, add a little bit of its opposite color. If it's in the reds, add more towards the greens. Overlap this tree. So this is kind of a desaturated violet. I'll get a little bit more saturation as I get the light into it.
You desaturated it by putting in green though?
Yeah, well, it's in the red family, right? Red violet. So you can add olive greens. You can add different types of greens.
Oh.
Yeah. It's in the blue families. You can go towards reds and oranges. And we'll start adding a little bit more light to that and saturation. So this is just kind of indication of these plants back in here. I'm not trying to render, I'm just basically doing one silhouette shape of a value over another silhouette shape of a value. This is probably a little bit more complicated of a scene than I would normally do for the first demo. Normally I would just do something like a tree or something, like I did on Tuesday. But you know, it's an overcast day and there's a lot of nice colors here. I thought this would be a good one to kind of do. So it might take a few minutes longer.
But that's why you chose this one, because it's overcast, so there's
Because
not
it's
really
overcast.
lighting to
Yeah.
capture.
So rather than just get a tree in front of a green bush or something, this
Got it.
has a little bit more interest to it.
If you saw this painting, you would be able to tell that you had painted this in an overcast day.
Well, I'm going a little bit brighter on some things, but yeah, if you look at the sky and stuff, it's not bright and sunny. This is probably sunnier down in here. So I'm pushing the light a little bit more than I would normally do as well.
Yeah, there are some like not happy clouds.
Not happy clouds, no.
More melancholy and constipated.
That would have been the adjective I would have used, but it's okay. One of these days I'll get to a smaller brush, a little bit more, but I want to get more into, start getting into the foreground here a little bit more.
And you've just been using the round brush since
Yeah,
you
this
put
is
away
number
the...
9 round.
Okay.
For not for all of it, but for these spiky things and things like that, I use a little bit of a round brush. Yeah.
Okay.
So as I keep adding light into here, so this is like the 4th value onto this here, then I'll start building up into more light. So you want to feel like the light's coming from the outside, but then going into the deeper values and colors.
What would you
And,
say is the maximum value that we should be using per object?
The maximum what?
Amount of values. Should
Oh,
we try to go
that's-
for the whole range? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you've got between 1 and 9. You got a lot of values, and you can break those down even more. So there's no set rule for that. Now, when you're starting out, when you're doing your value study, then that I want you to do the same thing. Just silhouette shapes, no detail whatsoever, and keep it simple. You probably don't have to use more than 7 or 8, 6 or 7 values for something like that. It's basically for you to understand what's dark over light and what's light over dark. And so you want to simplify your value study, but it also is going to tell you, today is going to be really difficult because there's not a great sense of lighting. But again, if you squint your eyes, you can still tell what's light over dark and dark over light. So it's always a good thing to start out doing that. So it gives you a range of values, even though it's not going to be the full range that you'll use in your painting. At least you give you the starting point of what's dark over light and what's light over dark. Just like I did with this, I already knew I wanted this to be light over dark. And it could probably be even lighter when I get a smaller brush. But I don't want to go too small. I never recommend going smaller than a number 6. This is a number 9. As I go over to the left here, I'm going to go more towards the blues because I don't want it to be terribly light on this side. I want it to stay in the cooler colors. So the focus is always coming around here more. So a little bit of that light is fine. So it can be a cooler blue light. Doesn't have to be a bright yellow light. So that's one of the ways you might want to interpret color just a little bit differently. Push the cools in the cool areas, push the warms in the warm areas. Keep playing light over dark, dark over light, warm over cool, cool over warm. Saturation versus less saturated. All those things can apply. I'm going to have to go darker in some of these areas down in here. I'm going to separate these plants just a little bit more, so I'm going to start out a little bit darker. And I'm going to go darker under here as well. Here, I'm going to start indicating some plants in this area here very quickly as just cool colors. Andrew, what time do we have? Or anybody?
It's 11:30.
11:30. Okay, we're fine. It's a little bit longer than I want to spend, but normally I want to finish up by about 11:45, so everybody can start on a value study right before lunch. So I'm going to rough in some shapes over here, and then I'm going to keep them in the cools. And build up to the warms a little bit more. I switch back to the shader, the angled shader brush over here, just so I can kind of get these in a little bit quicker.
So when you're indicating the plants, you're not actually indicating them the color that you're going to paint them. It's just the
Well, I'm
temperature.
indicating the interior color, but not the
okay.
exterior light.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of these can be different, as again, I keep playing with different temperatures as well as different colors, because it just makes it more interesting. And I'm going to go a little bit darker texture with the brush. Okay. So on the ground plane, on the little path, sometimes you want to just give it little indications. I'm going to make it feel like it has some little
Shadow.
light areas and shadow areas and things like that, almost like a little road, little path or something like that, just to kind of pull the viewer back into there a little bit more.
Hmm.
Just a little bit more intense color back in here as well. Okay, one thing you can do when you have something like that, that little pathway, if you want to add little spatter to it, and just kind of turn this upside down or sideways actually would be better. And just kind of spatter some things onto it. Makes it feel more like a desert anyway, right?
Yeah.
Could be a little, I can pull more light into this as we go along too, but you have to be careful with yellows so it doesn't get too acidic looking. So I want to have just little patches of light and things kind of in here. These will dry darker, so it's not going to dry the same value. But sometimes there's little ways you can just kind of get that little textural effect. And again, you know, you don't have to finish these on location. Again, the intention is to finish these in Photoshop. So don't go crazy with trying to think you have to finish everything. You won't anyway. But. Start pulling in a little bit more light.
Paintings make things look better.
Hmm?
I love how just paintings make things look better.
What looks make?
It just makes everything look so much like alive.
That's the Disney approach.
It's magical.
It's magical.
It's
See
magic.
the little fairies back here?
Yeah.
Now you'll ruin my painting. Thanks.
Good job.
Little dust
That's right. Little dust flecks.
Oh, white flowers. Who knows?
Most of the paintings I do now are for Disney Fine Art. So I can paint any scenes I want from any movies. I don't even have to be, doesn't even have to be a scene. It can just be anything I want. And then they sell them to collectors. I do a lot of that now. Is that sun hitting me?
No, you're
No,
good.
you're good.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, sure is. So you guys will get some nice light, I think, with your paintings.
So toasty.
How differently would you approach it with the sun now?
I'm not sure I approach it a lot differently. What it does is it just builds more contrast. And sometimes this scene isn't a really great one to really focus on light, but sometimes you'll find some trees and things where the light's just hitting just right in certain areas to create a more interesting area of the tree. And I'll show you that when we start, you know, start figuring out what it is you guys are going to paint today. Start helping you with that a little bit.
Are we all gonna paint in the same general area?
Same general area, yeah. Otherwise, I won't be able to find you or help you. So I need to know where you are. Andrew needs to know where you are.
Didn't bring a segue.
You like walkie-talkies.
It's happened though where I've had students that
You
are
like
they
implants?
find these little cubby holes underneath plants and things, and I can't find them, and you know, I go, I know, you know, Emily is here somewhere. I don't know where she is. So that thing happens. So you got to make sure that I know where you are and Andrew knows where you are, because we take roll at the beginning and the end, so make sure everybody is accounted for,
Survived.
have survived
Somebody
the
went
experience.
missing.
That's right.
Emily Finnegan?
Huh?
Which Emily? Or just a
Oh, I
random
just
name?
made that up.
I see.
Well, Emily is my other TA for the other class, but you guys are so literal.
it makes you feel better, I'm annoyingly metaphorical.
Well, I can tell just by that statement alone. What does that mean? You like metaphors?
Hmm?
Is that what you're saying? You like metaphors?
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Well, let's see. I described to my doctor when I had a sore throat that it felt like I had swallowed dried Cheetos and toenails.
Ew.
I
Yeah.
think that's a simile, not a metaphor.
We're about to eat lunch now.
Metaphor is, simile is like.
This is an English class? What are we doing here?
We were talking about this in Image and Idea the other day. Can we help bring it up again?
You guys are gonna make me crazy.
Why would you want to be sane? Those
Yeah.
people are boring. No one ever cared to write about a sane man.
All right. Well, let's see. Deeper in here. The sun is really bright now. Man,
know that.
changed my whole painting. Gotta get more darks down
Where's
here.
my eyes?
I need more shade from somewhere. I need to make sure this is covered with the shade and this is covered with the shade. Can we move that umbrella, please? It's around. So I want the shade to be on me and the painting and the palette.
A little bigger umbrella.
Well, I might get another one this year as well, but it changes the whole look of everything if it's all of a sudden the light and everything is changing. So it's one of those things.
Mm.
All the joys of painting.
There's my umbrella in the car.
Is there anybody here that has painted outside before?
Tried.
Right?
Not formally.
Not formally? I don't think there's any formal way of painting outside.
Just was
Black tie
screwing
event.
around.
Pardon?
I was just, screwing around. I don't think I did a very good job, but I tried.
So, a little bit more blues on the
You know,
interior.
when you were a kid, you used to like artist left friends.
Yeah, leaves.
So I get more opaque as I go along, less opaque in the beginning, more opaque with the paint. You can almost use it like oil after you get the initial lay-in. Then you can go pretty opaque with some of these areas in here. And that's the real fun, especially with gouache. Just makes things a little more workable. And we'll be done here pretty soon, at least enough for this. I might have to go back into this a little bit later and touch up a few things. I want you guys to be able to have painting time today. So over here, there's just a lot of stuff going on over there as well. So I'm going to keep the purple flowers just back here at the focal point. If I start putting purple everywhere and everything else. Now, one of the things that is always another thing to identify or lead your eye to the focal point is to isolate a color. At least the intensity of the color. I got little violets and stuff everywhere in here, but if I leave the intensity of the violet right there, that will establish that as the focal point as well, because it's the only color of that intensity in the whole painting. So you can add that kind of to the list. Well, I did say saturation of color, so that kind of falls into that category. So I'm going to quickly try and just get a little bit more of a landscape kind of thing in here. Not too much more. I want it to stay fairly gray. But I'll just get a little textural effect going in this area here. And back in here. So I just want that little textural effect to give it that grittiness that it has. And I still have to add more lights and stuff in here as well, but I'm trying to rush through this real quick here because I know it's getting kind of late. And up in here, I haven't really done anything with these guys yet, so I might switch to a different brush on that. Let me get just a little bit brighter color on this. Be careful not to, when you're using white, it's real easy to get too chalky with the paint, so I want you to be careful with that as well.
How do you keep it from getting chalky?
Add less white. Add more saturation of color.
Okay, so add color to the white.
Yeah. I'm gonna get a few of these since this is kind of needs to be lit better. Let's see if I have my other brush, smaller brush. Might make it a little easier.
And is it okay to wear sunglasses when you're doing it if it's
No.
too bright? That's what I can't.
No, because it'll change the color. I do have a pair of sunglasses that does not change the color. And sometimes it's actually easier to see the values wearing sunglasses, but squinting is always a good idea. And also looking through, just do this with your hand and looking through like this. It'll give you a greater sense of depth perception. I learned that from Disney actually. There's all sorts of different things, little tricks and things. But if you're going to use sunglasses, they can't be like tinted sunglasses that have a color associated with them. If you can get some real clear ones that don't change the colors. I'm not sure they even make too many of those. Get some other little colors and things in here as well. So here I'm playing with temperatures of color just a little bit more, going into the blues, blue-greens. And again, it just sort of adds that little extra sense of color. And there's a lot of blue in that particular plant anyway, so I kind of like that idea. Whatever you do when you do plants like this, don't do a generic thing where you just kind of do this. I used to require sketchbooks for this class, 80 pages of a sketchbook. But what I noticed when I did that was everybody did these beautiful drawings. Most Art Center students draw pretty well. But then when they went to the painting, completely different. They didn't know how to translate those drawings into paint. And so the painting would come out completely different. And I figured that wasn't helping so much. So I eliminated the sketchbook and just went to the value studies instead, because everybody is missing values. And I think that's a lot more critical to understand. If you can understand values, then that is really an absolute thing that you will need to know. Really good structure for values. So
there's one general thing to do like on a plant. If you're starting like on that one, how you started with like purple as the cool, and then you kind of generally build up to the warm, so
yes,
then the next color.
If you know you're going to play warm against cool, then you want to start with cool colors generally as the background, which is what I did here. So everything is basically all cool
But,
colors. Even the other painting, this is all cool.
Like with this particular plant, it went to violet, so then the next color you use would maybe be more like a blue, and then the next color is more like a green, and then you finish with like the yellow.
Well, I can't just say it.
Yeah.
I mean, some colors are warmer than others. You can have a warm blue and a cool blue. You can have a warm green and a cool green. So it can be the exact same color, but just a warmer version. And it's all relative. That's the problem with teaching color, because everything is relative to airplanes or helicopters. Yeah, everything is kind of relative. So every color and value you put down is relative to what it's next to or around. So it can have a completely different meaning. And it's such a hard thing to explain sometimes too. But color is relative. It depends on what's surrounding it, what's next to it, what's where you're leading with it, where you plan on going with it. All sorts of different factors go into dealing with color. It's very, very difficult. So I'm not going to have time to finish it, the whole thing here. But the final thing would be to go back and put in these really bright contrast. If I was going to go back and do more lights, it would be at this point. If I'd go back and put little punches of light and detail and things in with a smaller brush probably, but not too small. Just try to really observe the shape language, and I think that's one of the real takeaways you can get from this class is observation of plants and things. Because when you're working on a film, you don't always have reference every single time that you do something. Because sometimes they'll say, "Can you do something in the next hour and give me?" And you don't have time to go looking things up and finding things. Although with the internet, you can pretty much do that nowadays. So that's an advantage. Okay, so just as a quick lay-in here, I'm going to go to this other plant before we start getting a little bit of that in. I still have more light I want to put in this. And I won't get to the flowers and things either at this point, but I want to at least start building up to the lights on some of these. Probably should have picked an easier scene for today. It's a little bit complicated.
Well, if you do the hard stuff first, then the easy part looks all the more easy.
Not to you guys. I don't think that's gonna work in this case, but this is just sort of an abbreviated way of doing these things. I mean, letting the brush create that sense of shape and texture, and the more you can do that, that's okay to do, but just don't make it too superficial like I'm kind of doing right now. If I was doing just this as a color key for a movie, this would be enough information for most directors. But for final painting, if you're working on a 2D film or something like that, or they wanted a final painting even for a 3D film, I could spend another 2 days on this and really finish it. I think the longest I ever spent on a film on a painting was on The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where I spent up to 3 weeks on one painting.
Which scene was it?
A couple of scenes where I had to do entire down shots of the city of Paris, and the paintings were about this long,
Perspective.
about this high, and about that long. And with Notre Dame in it as well. There's no trees in the entire movie, I don't think. It was all architectural.
Oh gosh.
So it took a lot of time to do that. All those buildings, and Notre Dame alone was a lot.
Wow, no trees in the movie.
If you have the making of Notre Dame, the book, or making of Hunchback, there's a book. Even the cover painting is mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can find that on Amazon, by the way. I don't get
With
any
their book?
royalties. I get no royalties from that.
Damn.
No. It's all Disney.
Yeah.
Oh, that really sucks. You can't ever clean anything.
Run that by me again? Did you say?
It's like, whenever you work for a company, you can never say, "This is my work."
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It kind of sucks.
I have some of the original paintings I could show you that I got from when I was doing the book. I got to go to the research library at Disney and get a lot of my paintings from different movies and things, but they're very, very protective about stuff.
I'm gonna ask, like you
Yeah.
said that you put some of those in your book. How does that work if they're owned by Disney?
My publisher has to pay a licensing fee for those paintings.
Got it.
Oh,
Dang.
Yep. So I have the license. The publisher gets the license from Disney. I have the license to use the material, but everything has to be approved through Disney. So every little bunny.
They don't mess around. It's
Disney?
crazy.
No, they
Oh my
don't.
gosh.
No, you can't do anything without getting copyright. Even for Disney Fine Art, everything I do has got to be approved through Disney before they can release it, whether it's going to Disney World or Disneyland or anything like that. It has to.
It's just kind of funny because like growing up, it's like Disney is all like this magical thing, but as you work in this, it's
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 all-
a
it's all money.
business.
They
No,
do
it's a
magic,
business.
right?
Yeah.
It's
All
a
the
huge,
magic.
huge business.
It's really intimidating.
Oh, no.
Have you seen how they've extended
It's called
copyright laws?
capitalism. That's how the country works. It's no different than McDonald's or Jack in the Box or In-N-Out Burger. They're all businesses.
It only changes if like the
They're
public
just-
actually cares.
Well, they do
Or
care. I
complains.
mean, if you want to go to Disneyland, you know, you're paying money to get into Disneyland. They're creating the magic for you. They're creating the entertainment. It's all
Star
entertainment. It's
Wars.
no different than Lord of the Rings or any other movie company or Universal, Warner Brothers. They're all the same.
Sorry, I should have said if you pay them or not.
Huh?
Well, like as soon as everyone cared about this has gluten, everyone like the companies were like, oh, well, we'll offer non-gluten options.
Well, yeah. Yeah, if a movie doesn't sell, they'll do a different movie. They have a lot of movies that weren't big hits. You know, they're not all of them are going to be hits, and they lose a lot of money on movies as well at times, but they try and make sure that the movies don't lose money. That's the nature of the game. But, you know, it's all for entertainment. It's all or whatever the company's selling. Same thing when you buy art supplies. They're not in business just to supply you with art supplies. They're making money, right?
Right. I mean, like whatever is preventing them to make money versus what will make people give them
Well,
money.
that's where they have. That's, you know, a lot of companies don't make money and end up going out of business.
Yeah.
Car companies almost failed. So there's all sorts of things that, you know, it's a gamble. But all right. So anyway, this is sort of an abbreviated, quick one here. So before we adjourn, is there any questions or comments about what I've done so far on this? I'll go back and do more work on it just so I can try and get a little bit more done. But maybe not today, maybe, if I have time.
Did you record the whole thing?
So when you do the sky first, that is what you're gonna kind of leave for now is like the final sky.
Yeah, I probably
background?
wouldn't change that at all
Okay.
too much. I think it's fine. It's a very overcast day. I'm just kind of a little bit of blue poking through now. But it's fine for what it is, I think, for...
So when you establish the sky, you pretty much figure that that's gonna be the end result.
No, not necessarily. You can always go back into anything, you know. I can go back in and take the fairies out right now. You know, I can just a little water on that and the fairies are gone. They just fool them.
You just
Oh,
killed them.
it's all-
Disappear.
Yeah. So again, the final thing I would probably do, I would add probably a little more details if I wanted to add some like thinner branches and things like that. I would probably do that at this stage. I'd probably go back and add more detail, more light to certain areas. So it's not entirely finished by any stretch, but as a demo, I think it gives you a starting point in terms of at least getting things going. Now again, I'm not asking for a whole lot today, but I want you to do your best because we'll probably do just 2 sessions, this week and maybe next week. So I'm thinking 3rd week we'll probably go in, or 4th week. This is week 1.
This is week 2.
This is week 2. Jeez, where the heck am I? Okay, probably week 4 will be our first lab session.
Ooh.
So we want to try and get as much done today and the next time that you can have something in the lab to work on. So the first thing you're going to do is photograph the location and do that about every 30 or 40 minutes. Not more than 30 minutes. 30 minutes or less. So so you have documentation of what it is that you're going to be working on. So you have that in the lab as well. So here's where I'd start probably adding a little bit more. Is it about 12 o'clock? Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 11:55.
11:55? Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is scout out the location, and I'll show you. Doesn't have to be this necessarily. This is very difficult, I think, for students to start out with. So I'm going to take you up here a little bit further, and show you a location that's just mostly like trees and things that I think will be better to start with. Okay, so anyway, I'll set this out here. If you want to take a quick snapshot or something, you're welcome to do that. But I would like the umbrella over it so it doesn't get